Isn't it splendid to think of all the things there are to find out about? It just makes me feel glad to be alive. It's such an interesting world. It wouldn't be half so interesting if we knew all about everything, would it? There'd be no scope for the imagination then, would there? Hi, I'm Rachel Kimberly Hastings, an author, an artist, and screenwriter for animation. Welcome back to the Storyteller Treehouse. I just got back from the most incredible trip to Europe, so I'm excited to share about my experiences and takeaways from the journey. Using a handy-dandy Eurail pass, I traveled around London, France, Switzerland, and Scotland. Part of the time I had company. My cool parents decided to tag along for the ride, and we had some really fun adventures together. This was technically my second time backpacking around Europe, but this time I was way more serious about packing super light and recording the journey all along the way, ending with a magical once-in-a-lifetime experience at a writer's retreat in Scotland. So come along and I'll share what it's like traveling as a writer, how this trip has impacted my creative life and ideas, and some tips about backpacking in Europe in general. Because you're going to want to hop on a plane and explore Europe for yourself, aren't you? So before we get into all the cool stuff I did in Europe, I'm sure some of you are wondering how on earth I packed everything I needed into my backpack and how I carried all the camera gear I needed with me. I'm glad you asked. These are valid questions. Let's peel back the curtain of mystery. So here's what I brought. My modest-sized hiking backpack and my trusty Tamrac camera bag. And everything I needed fit into these two bags, and that was it. So a couple of tips for those of you who are considering doing backpacking and don't even know where to start. First of all, dump the liquids. I actually found bar shampoo that I was able to bring. It worked great. It foams up just like regular shampoo. And I also found some awesome laundry detergent sheets. These are little tiny strips, basically, that you can toss into the washing machine or wash in the sink. They just dissolve and become detergent. It's super handy, and I recommend it for anyone who's packing super light. I'll put links in the description of all the things that I brought that I got on Amazon if you're interested. Another thing that was super helpful was using compression cubes. This was my first time actually using them, and they were amazing because you just stuff them in and zip them up, and all your clothes are kind of compressed, all the air is out, and they fit really nicely into my backpack. And then number 3, only bring what you'll actually use. This is something that I had to really think about before I left, is what would I actually use while I'm there? So one thing I did bring in my camera bag is I actually was able to fit my tiny travel watercolor set. I do travel watercolors when I'm out and about, and that's sort of, I put them in these moleskin watercolor sketchbooks that they've kind of become my souvenirs. Instead of buying lots of bulky or expensive souvenirs, I just do some artwork. I always do plein air paintings and sketches as I'm traveling to capture the moment and remember the vibes. As for the Eurail pass, now everything is digital, so I'm able to do everything on my phone with the app. I bought the pass that looked like it would be the right fit for me online, and then downloaded the app, and I was able to do pretty much everything I needed through the app. On the app, you can find scheduled trains to and from the cities on your itinerary, add them to your planned journey, and activate travel days when you're committed to a particular route. Now, I should warn you that the app is not the most user-friendly thing. For certain trains, like high-speed trains and international trains, you have to book seat reservations in addition to having your Eurail pass. And these usually cost a little bit. The thing is, you can't always book the reservations through the app. You have to actually go either to the Eurail website or the specific operator of that train in order to buy your seat reservations ahead of time. Now, most trains don't require reservations, but sometimes it might be a good idea to book one anyway. It can be nice to have the peace of mind knowing that you have a seat with your name on it. The flexibility of being able to hop on a train and go virtually anywhere in Europe was absolutely thrilling. I love trains, and I kind of do wish that I had more opportunity to travel by train in the United States. It's just not set up for that. But in Europe it is, and so it was so fun to be able to just hop on a train and go to Paris. As a writer, I love having the ability to sit at a table and write in my journal, or work on my iPad, or just sit and daydream up new story ideas as the world slides past outside my window. One thing I embraced more than ever on this trip was the idea that anything can be an adventure. In Paris, we did do some of the typical touristy things, but I made it a point to do some things specific to my own interests, like going to an amazing gluten-free bakery with the best gluten-free croissants, and then also going to French comic shops because I have an interest in French comics. This spirit of adventure also means being flexible when things don't exactly go according to plan. Our plans to go and see the Eiffel Tower didn't work out, even though we waited in line for quite a while. But I made the most of it. While we were waiting to find out if we would even be able to go up in the tower, I did spend some time doing some watercolors. I even drew a bit of a crowd, so I still had something to show for that little adventure, even though it didn't go quite as planned. And then we pivoted to explore the city by boat instead, and we ended the day by going to see the Eiffel Tower at night, which was so much fun. I even caught a glimpse of Cat Noir posing for the paparazzi. No sign of Ladybug, though. After a few days in Paris, we hopped on a train to Switzerland. The scenery was breathtaking, traveling through the French countryside and on to the Alps. I tried to write, but honestly, I was glued to the windows most of the time. Arriving in Lauterbrunnen Valley in Switzerland was magical. There's no other word for it. I learned that J.R.R. Tolkien was inspired after visiting here to create the beautiful haven of Rivendell in Middle-earth. It's easy to see why. I could imagine myself a member of the Fellowship of the Ring as I hiked trails through mountains and forests around the Jungfrau region. I loved Switzerland. It felt like a tiny taste of heaven, wandering about the waterfalls and standing on tops of mountains. Yes, there are tourists everywhere, and yes, there were crowded cable cars and trains, but the peace and beauty of the place is still pervasive. It's a whole collection of adventures I'll never forget. One adventure in particular was our trip up to the highest train station in Europe, the Jungfraujoch, nestled in the yoke between two of the three highest peaks in the region. The train cuts through the mountain's stony heart, and the train station at the top is partially built into the rock. There's an observatory above it looking out over the glacier. Sure, there's some stereotypical touristy stuff, but overall it's a blast. They have an underground ice palace with tunnels completely made of ice. One of my back burner story ideas is about a culture that lives high in the snowy mountains and makes structures like these in the ice, so I tried to soak everything in and hoard it for later. One thing I found challenging on this trip was allowing space for creativity. We crammed in so much seeing and doing, like descending all the way from Jungfraujoch to Interlaken to catch the last boat tour of the day. I don't regret any of the things we did. After all, we only had so much time on this side of the Atlantic, but keeping up a pace like that can be exhausting. And as a writer, I found it harder than I'd expected to make time to journal or reflect on all the wondrous things I was seeing each day. So I guess that would be my tip for any creative person who's thinking of traveling. Make space for reflection, and take that extra time to really soak in a place if you can. After leaving Switzerland, we only had one day in a town I'd been wanting to visit for a while, Colmar, France. This town is said to have been the inspiration for Belle's French village in the Disney animated film Beauty and the Beast. I certainly could see the resemblance. But the exhaustion of traveling was catching up with me, and while we certainly spent a lovely afternoon and evening exploring the town, I found it difficult to really absorb it fully. If this feeling doesn't make sense to anyone else, feel free to let me know I'm just a weirdo in the comments. Still, Colmar was a beautiful town with some truly amazing food, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to explore its canals and cobblestone streets. After leaving France, we traveled all the way to Edinburgh, Scotland, where I spent the last couple days with my parents. We visited the castle and walked the Royal Mile, of course, as well as a few other attractions like Mary King's Close. Spooky. But one of my favorite things we did was just explore the closes, which is what they call the narrow alleyway walkways between buildings. One of the closes leads to a secluded courtyard where there is a writer's museum, a charming old building with exhibits about 3 of Scotland's most famous authors, Robert Burns, Robert Louis Stevenson, and Sir Walter Scott. Edinburgh is steeped in literary traditions and legends both old and new. J.K. Rowling wrote much of Harry Potter in this place, and you can find places and names that reflect her works in surprising ways. After my parents went home, I spent a whole day exploring various bookshops around the city. I realize this is a quirk of mine, but hey, I'm a writer. I'm entitled to some bookish indulgence. I visited shops for used books and new, large shops and tiny, chains and independent stores. Finally leaving Edinburgh, I headed north, by train of course, toward Inverness, where I visited my favorite bookshop I saw on the whole trip, complete with a wood-fire stove to keep things dry and toasty inside. This shop also had antique maps and art prints and a wonderful second story with even more old books. Okay, I'm done gushing. But yeah, writer, bookstores, that simple. From Inverness, I traveled to the smaller town of Forres, Scotland, and made my way on foot and by bus all the way to the magnificent estate of Burgee House, where I attended the Writer's Sanctuary Lore Retreat, led by authors C.J. Redwine and Mary Weber. The retreat was a refreshing breath of crisp Highland air. From the haunted billiards room to the servant staircase to antique preserved elephant feet, yes, really, the house itself was full of surprises and wonders. It was like opening the wardrobe and stepping into Narnia. The grounds around the mansion were magical as well. Sprawling gardens and, oh hey, would you look at that, a nut grove just for me. A short walk from the house was a horse pasture, and beyond that we found the ruins of an old castle surrounded by sheep pastures and sheep. In the morning and evening we all gathered together in the cozy sitting room for teaching and mentorship, learning from Mary and CJ as well as each other, and sharing bits of our writing from the day's prompts. And the food! We ate very well during the retreat, and they even had gluten-free alternatives for everything. I was so spoiled. For our day trip, we piled in vans and trekked through the rain to Loch Ness. While the weather didn't allow us to go out on the loch, it did clear up enough for us to visit the historic remains of Urquhart Castle. We were even blessed with a rainbow. After a brief detour with some adorable Highland cows, look at their little faces! We also visited the historic site of Elgin Cathedral. While I've never climbed so many spiral staircases in my life, the view at the top of the tower was certainly worth the effort. All of these aspects contributed to the sense of timelessness and history, perfect to inspire a writer's creative soul. During the retreat, I wrote some poetry, which is something I haven't done in a long time, and I also happened to finish the first draft of my middle grade science fiction project while I was there. I wasn't concerned about writing a ton. For me, it was more about making connections with new writer friends, soaking in the beautiful environment, and allowing myself to recharge my creative batteries. So was it worth it? Absolutely. I took the train back down to Edinburgh, marveling at the amazing snow-capped mountains through the Highlands and daydreaming about when I might come back someday. In Edinburgh, I had one more day to explore the city, so I went to Dean's Village, a picturesque little area tucked away next to the river with beautiful scenery and architecture. Then to round off my bookstore tour of Scotland, I popped into Waterstones, where there's a cafe that looks out at the Castle Hill. Oh, and I bought a few books because it was my last day, and I didn't have to worry about lugging them all around Europe anymore. So that's the end of this particular adventure. I'm sure I'll be doing a lot more traveling as soon as I'm able to. If you stuck around until now, thank you, and please let me know in the comments where in the world you would love to travel if you could. Or have you ever gone to a writer's retreat somewhere outside of your hometown? I'd love to hear about your experience. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, back in the treehouse.